Genres, a way of characterizing art by the similarities in their style, form, and subject matter. Every single film you've seen falls into some sort of genre, from action flicks like Mission Impossible, John Wick and The Raid, to horror flicks like Alien, The Thing, and Halloween. They all fit somewhat easily into one of these categories. But what about films that flip-flop constantly between genres to the point where we really can't tell what exact genre they are a part of? We see this a lot in films like Oldboy, Parasite, and Bone Tomahawk, films that rapidly change the genre that they would fall into scene by scene, but not in a way that feels like a chaotic mess. It's something that's really difficult to pull off in a way that feels seamless, as with what was stated before, the styles of these films often change to reflect the new genre it is switching to. But before getting into these films, major spoilers for these films ahead. If you haven't seen any of these films listed below, make sure to go and watch them. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe if you liked the video, and let me know in the comments down below what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Okay, now let's continue. For example, while I would consider Parasite overall to be a family genre, some of the scenes swap to a more horror and thriller-esque filmmaking style. Most specifically with the scene of them going into the basement of the house to meet the husband of the former housekeeper. In this scene, while the rest of the film is more open and bright, more characteristic of the family drama style of filming, it instead swaps to dingy lighting and tight corridors, something much more characteristic of a thriller or horror film. And this is a swap that continues throughout the rest of the film, with the rest of the film after following those same framing techniques as it moves to the more thriller section of the film, as the family slowly realizes just how much they doom themselves as they now have committed murder. This is a very clear switch up within the film, and films that are able to do this around some sort of plot twist, although are extremely common, it's extremely rare for a film to do it correctly. It's a surefire way to keep your audience intrigued, as if you went in expecting the whole film to stay in the same groove, such a big switch up may be shocking and drag you back into the film if you were starting to drift away. Hell, one of the most famous examples of this includes the film Psycho, a switch up so shocking at the time of its release that people were actually fainting within the theater and boycotting the film due to it being seen as obscene. See, for some quick background, Alfred Hitchcock before this point had really only been within the thriller genre, and he was strictly within it, with films like North by Northwest and Rope. Most of his films did not switch up and stayed on their course for their entire runtime, so it was even more shocking when at the end of the first 30 minutes of Psycho, which had been setting up the film as a thriller, our main character is brutally murdered, showing the film's true horror colors. This genre switch up is so extreme that it literally made people boycott the film and try to get the film banned, as literally no one had any idea the switch up was going to happen. Hell, the trailers for this film were infamous anyways, because Hitchcock purposely did not show any footage from the actual film, instead only walking through the set showing off the Bates Motel. It's a wonderful change, however I do not think it's my personal favorite. My personal favorite genre changeup has got to be the switch from an action war film to a sci-fi slasher film in 1987's Predator. Predator starts off extremely simply with a start we've seen in hundreds of 80s action films, with Dutch and his group of army commandos being set deep into the rainforest to save some US soldiers. This film is simple, deceptively simple, seeming a lot like Schwarzenegger's previous film Commando, which don't get me wrong, it's a fun movie but it has not aged particularly amazing. However, upon actually landing within the forest, things already begin to feel off. Like yeah, it's just the forest, but the atmosphere of the film immediately begins to change. Instead of the happy-go-lucky characters that we saw conversing at the beginning, suddenly the characters get all serious and an atmospheric drum begins to play in the background. They seem to be watching everything around them, like they could be jumped at any moment, and the music almost makes it seem like something is watching them at all times. Then things quickly take a dark turn, as they find the bodies of the group they were searching for quite literally skinned alive, and hanging upside down within the forest in an extremely grisly sight. This is already much more gruesome than a lot of the other 80s action films, and the framing reflects that, with the sequence being edited and shot in a way that makes the bodies work like a jump scare. This is a very clear hint of things to come, but just like the characters, we assume that maybe the enemy they are looking for is just extremely violent, as while the sight is gruesome, they seem to have seen worse over the years. And then upon finding the enemy camp, we get a goofy action sequence, highly reminiscent of Schwarzenegger's other work. But at the end of the scene, we start to get a glimpse of something watching them from afar, and the tone quickly begins to change. Realizing that the mission was actually a setup by the CIA to do Dylan's mission for him, Dylan gets mad as they take a girl for more info into the forest to meet up with the helicopter. This is where there's a clear style change in the way it's shot. Rather than the big action showpieces, we instead get a much more somber tone with a lot more close-ups and much less space for our characters to go. It also emphasizes the emptiness of the forest, as there's quite literally no wildlife around them. Instead, all we hear are the sounds of the forest around them with the occasional glimpses of something watching them from afar. And then the same drums begin from the scene of the hanging corpses, a clearer motif of the film that will come back later. This is the very beginning of the switch up, as just from the shot and sound design alone, we know that the characters are truly in danger, and this begins to build up the suspense. We know that something is watching them and is trying to learn their behaviors, but they don't yet, pulling on Hitchcock's law. Which, for those who don't know, for a quick explanation, that's when the audiences are told that our main characters are in danger, but the characters themselves don't know, which builds suspense as we're waiting for the moment where the danger finally confronts the characters. And when it finally does confront them in the killing of Blaine and Hawkins in brutal fashion, it quickly disperses them and takes them away for his trophy collection. From this point onward, I would venture to call this film a slasher film, not just in plot, but in the way the film is shot as well. Let's look at the quintessential slasher film, John Carpenter's Halloween. In this film, we see Laurie Strode get stalked and followed by Michael Myers, an escaped mental patient who killed his sister back in 1963. This film created a lot of the tropes we know from slasher films to this day, as every single time someone splits away from the group, they are killed, and the film ends with a nearly unkillable monster chasing the final girl throughout the world, leading to a battle of wits of who's smarter and who can survive. Predator uses these tropes to spectacular effect, as after the scene in the enemy encampment, every single time we see the characters split off from one another, they are picked off. And just like a lot of slasher films before them, the film changes rapidly. As well, in the first sequence, we were mainly looking up at these guys, showing how big and intimidating they are. It instead switches to higher angle shots, showing that from the monster's perspective, these hulks are in fact quite small, and look incredibly unintimidating to our hunter. And it's emphasized in the final battle even more, as while they begin to fight, when Arnold gets pinned, we see just how much larger the Predator is in comparison to him, as he's played by Kevin Peter Hall, who famously stood at around 7'2". And to continue, as they get picked off one by one, this dwindles their members more and more, until finally Arnold is the only one remaining, fulfilling the final girl trope. And here's the thing. Unlike a lot of the other films that fall within the slasher subgenre, none of these characters are unintelligent. In fact, I would venture to say they're quite smart when it comes to their ways of trying to take it down. But what increases the tension of the film is that despite these characters making somewhat smart decisions and realizing just how the monster works, the creature is just a much better hunter than they are in every single way. One of my personal favorite sequences to show this is the confrontation that Mac and Dylan have with the Predator, as while we think that they may be able to outsmart it, as Mac is now able to spot it within the trees, watching them from afar, so maybe, just maybe, they'll be able to take it out without it knowing. However, this quickly gets proven wrong, as when they dispatch from one another, both quickly get wiped away extremely quickly. And while you may think Dylan's death is due to incompetence, I think that his death makes much more sense in the context of the film. Remember, these commandos were just sent here on a standard recon mission, and at this point, they all still just assume this is a soldier with some sort of advanced technology. But when confronted head-on with the alien, Dylan realizes that this is in fact not human, but something much, much more advanced, and we see this in his reaction as he completely freezes up. The same thing happens with Mac, as while he thinks that he's sneaking up on the Predator, he quickly realizes by the laser that he has in fact just walked directly into the trap the Predator set in the first place. And then there's the death of Billy, who realizes that the monster is in fact hunting for sport, so he decides he wants to see if the monster would be willing to do a fair fight, as he takes everything off and instead only uses his knife. And the monster obliges, but still quickly disperses him, showing that while the monster is hunting with more advanced technology, it still wants to hunt in a way that's fair, showing that it's more for sport rather than just hunting for food. All of this increases tension to the highest degree, as this monster isn't really something that can be reasoned with, and while most monsters in the films are feral and instinct-driven, this one is a bit different. Rather, this one is much, much more intelligent, much more like a slasher film villain like Michael Myers. And all of this tension that has been building up throughout the entire film boils up in the entire finale of the film, following Dutch as he is completely left alone with the monster with no weapons but rather just his wits. But unlike his peers who unfortunately were dispatched too early, Dutch has learned from the deaths of his peers. Now he knows exactly how this creature works, as he knows that the Predator must be using some sort of heat vision, thus he uses mud to cover up his heat signature. He then sets up tons of traps, which he uses to actually begin hurting the predator, and of course ultimately dispatches the predator. Just like in a lot of slasher films, he learns how to defeat it from the people who didn't make it before, and while it still is a bit more action in a sense than Halloween, Dutch is just as vulnerable to the alien as Laurie Strode is. The alien is a much better hunter than Dutch is, and he knows that, which is where the tension of the film comes from. And unlike the others who thought the monster was somewhat equal or lesser than them, Dutch knows that this is something a bit more and instead tries to outsmart it, which of course ends up working, but just like a slasher film, the killer does not get dispatched easily, instead being taken down multiple times just to get right back up and continuing to hunt Dutch. It's very slasher-esque, and while most people would not go far enough to call it a slasher film, I'm going to take the leap and call it one and a major genre switch in the film, and it does this excellently. From the wonderful framing change to the weakness in such powerful characters, it's powerful filmmaking, and it's an excellent switch up that keeps us on our toes for the rest of the film and really just shows how powerful this tool can be for future films. And that is all for this week. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Make sure to let me know and I'll see you all next week.